Yeah.
Direct your attention.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I mean, you can try to talk over my voice. We'll see how you will succeed. You know, some months ago I just counted that being 46 years old, I have about 35 years of teaching experience. So it happened early in my life. So whatever. It's great to be home. You know, in that sense, home sweet home. You know, we've been in different places, but Bible studies are available. So we will be here today in Deuteronomy 34. If you have your Bibles with you, or if you have your apps in your iPhones or Samsungs or whatever phones you have, those great devices. You know, some people treat them as diabolical stuff. You know, I don't think so. I mean, it's just a device. I mean, same as internet or anything like that. I mean, you can use it or you can abuse it. That's up to you, how you're going to treat it. So the very last chapter, I'm surprised actually, because sometimes what I'm surprised at is sometimes whoever decided what readings we will have, they usually cut the readings, you know, make them some kind of short or something. Now they have the whole chapter to us. That's great, and it's really great. So first of all, a couple of words about book of Deuteronomy. Okay, why do we have this weird name, Deuteronomy? Okay. Okay, so it's the 5th book in the Bible. And maybe one day we can have a Bible study, and we'll talk about how first 7 books relate to 7 days of the creation. And they do really relate pretty nicely. They have correlation with that. So Deuteronomy actually has 2 parts in this word, is Deuta and Nomi. So this is weird. Nomos is a Greek word for, and then Latin word for law. Okay, and this is second. Okay, so this is second time when we have the law. I don't like it, but that's a different story. So, because what happens in the book, most of the book, or all of the book, till we reach verse 9 in chapter 34. So from verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1, till 34, verse 9, it's one day. Seriously, no kidding. That's a long, long sermon of Moses.
Right.
I had some, let's put it this way, challenges in some of the congregations in U.S. when I preached, like, let's say 25 minutes, and people were complaining that it was too long. I said, you know, guys, first of all, if you have much more important things to do, just stand up and leave. I mean, I have no problem with that. Secondly, 34 chapters of very condensed text. That's one sermon of Moses. But this is Old Testament. This is not irrelevant to us. Okay, let's go to New Testament. What about Paul, who, after they gathered, after work, I guess probably like 6 p.m. or something like that, had some kind of snack, lunch, whatever they had, or dinner. And then he preached through midnight. So one fellow, you know, remember, he fell asleep and, you know, surprisingly, Paul didn't even bother to stop. He came after sermon and healed the guy and resurrected basically him from the dead. So that's one sermon. So this is one sermon, and then we have basically like 4 verses, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yes, 4 verses that kind of like summarize everything. Okay? So that's what it is. That's the book. So in a sense, this is the end of the period. So it's a book of ends. Okay? It's they okay. 3 movements. You can draw the land of Israel. 1, 2, 3. That's it. So that's where Jerusalem is. This is the Dead Sea, Galilean Sea, Mediterranean Sea, and that's the land of Israel. That's it. So simple. You don't need to know geography. But the thing is, so that's where they are right now. Okay? So they left Egypt. Somehow they bumped around the desert, blah, 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 and came over here. So they are right here. This is the end of their journey. Because right after this chapter, Moses will die. Joshua will have the power. He will be filled with wisdom. And they will cross the Jordan. Something happened. We'll talk about that during the class today. And then they will attack Jericho. Okay? So that's the end of the journey, the end of the 40 years in the desert. Okay? It's the end of life of Moses. And that's what we have in the chapter. So he wanted to be in the land. He wanted to cross the Jordan. Not going to happen. There are few reasons. We'll talk about them. But that's the end. On the other hand, however strange it might sound, it's a book of beginnings. Let me tell you, to understand it, first of all, we need to kind of go into original text. So if you have your Bibles with you, we might go into, if we'll go to Genesis. Genesis starts with, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? And in Hebrew is Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Okay, so you have this Breshit, the Bereshit, in the beginning, so we are going into that. And then interesting thing is in English, if we'll go to beginning of, so we have a story of Genesis, and Genesis is like one of the best probably books in the Bible for Hollywood, because it's happy ending. I mean, the very end is happy end, seriously, because Joseph is in charge of the empire that runs the world, at least this part of the world. Okay, so if we believe that Joseph is a faithful guy, so basically that means the whole country became at least introduced into true faith. Okay, but then we turn the page and we are in Exodus, and Exodus in English doesn't start right. What I say is, in English Standard Version, which is our standard version, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, blah, 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 blah. The thing is, English language as a language doesn't like to start the book with word and. Okay? A-N-D, not E-N-D, but A-N-D. The problem is, in Hebrew, that's what it starts with. And these are the names. Why they do that? I have no clue. That's just a very regular way to start a phrase in Hebrew. And this is this, okay? So, but think about that. We have a story of Genesis. And these are the names. And then we go to Leviticus, and it's the same thing. God called to Moses. Look at the first verse. But in Hebrew, and Lord called to Moses. And then, and Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings is a separate set of books that, and Deuteronomy therefore was not written by Moses whatsoever. It was written much, much later, and we have a story in the Bible about that. If you go to 2nd Kings, chapter 22. Let's open it. It is important to know. So, 2 Kings 22. Chapter 22 talks about the reforms of King Josiah. And while he was a king, verse 8. And Hilkiah, the high priest, said to Shaphan, the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, and he read it. And Shaphan's secretary came to the king and reported to the king, your servants have emptied out the money that was found in the house and have delivered it to the hand of the workmen who have oversight the house of the Lord. And he told him, and Hilkiah the priest have given me a book. So they read the book, and most likely this is the Deuteronomy. So the idea is that they didn't find the book, they just made it. Okay? And kind of wanted to introduce it to Israel as an old thing. Therefore, Josiah, when he makes his reforms, he basically based them on newfound or newly published Deuteronomy. Okay? It's called Deuteronomistic theology or Deuteronomistic history. So I wouldn't even desire to spend the time on that, but I have to warn you because you might get into commentary with these kind of ideas. Okay? If you see anything Deuteronomistic history or Deuteronomistic theology, you might continue to read it, but be very careful, be very suspicious. I just want to warn you. Okay? That's kind of like a huge, warning sign. Okay? So that's what it is. I personally do believe that it was written by Moses. I have no problem with Moses. Okay, chapter 34 probably was written, I don't know, a few days later by Joshua, just to finish the book, and that's what it is. Okay? So, going back. Now let's go back to, let's go to the text, more or less. Okay, verse 1. And we'll just go verse by verse or block by block, and I will add some comments. And if you will have any questions at the end. Deuteronomy 34, yeah. So we are now in our text. So 34. Then Moses went up to from the plains of Moab to Mountain Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which the opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, and all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as western sea, the Negev and the plain that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. Okay? So first of all, we have, if we compare this passage with 34, 1 to 3. If we compare it to chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, that's basically kind of like a good, what I would say, parenthesis. In the literature structure, it's called inclusio. So you have something in the beginning and something similar in the end, and the main block is in the middle, okay, in the center. Because chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, set the time and place. Okay? That's where Moses delivered his sermon. Now the sermon is done. he goes from the plain, right across from Jericho. He goes from the plain, he goes to the mountain. And whatever will happen in the rest of 34 will be on the mountain. Okay? So, it's interesting with this time and place, as I said, since 33 chapters, basically, are one-day story. Then let's jump into 1:1 for a second. Because sometimes you need to pay attention to dates. Sometimes, okay, let's reverse it. It is good to pay attention to dates in the Bible, and sometimes they are very important. So where are we? Verse 1:1. These are the words that Moses spoke to the Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness. Okay, so we have a setup for the sermon. Verse 3. In the 40th year of the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the people of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him in commandment to them. And blah, 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 blah. Okay? So we have 11th month. Okay? First day. So he preaches for 11th month, first day. Then he dies. Then, if we'll go back to our text, I know kind of jumpy place to place, but in verse 8, 34:8, what do Israelites do for next 30 days? Right. They weep, lament, they cry. I mean, whatever verb you want to use, doesn't matter, because it is really serious, important thing for them. So 30 days, that means 11th month is done with. They are almost at New Year season, okay? And New Year for them, it's not a feast of New Year, it's a first month is coming. So this happens roughly in February, okay? So the 12th month will be for preparation, and then they will enter the land. And then, what's the first feast that we celebrate in the first month? Passover, okay? And you cannot celebrate Passover unless the one most important condition for Passover is you have to be circumcised. That's why one of the first stories in the book of Joshua is all of those guys see Jericho right there, and then Lord tells them, by the way, you have a fun procedure to go through. You need to circumcise yourself. And they're like, maybe we can first, hit the Jericho and then circumcise ourselves, because we're going to be kind of, what's the term? City ducks, for them. It's like, no. First circumcise, then you will have a Passover, and you will have a victory. You're going to trust me, or you can go back to desert. So that's kind of like the chronological thing that we need to pay attention to. But so far, we are still in the desert. Verses 2 and 3 in 34. So, or half of the verse 1. So Lord showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali. So we name few of the tribes. Okay, if you remember from your Sunday school, back when you had Sunday school, with good old teachers who told you everything, that Jacob, for some fun reason, had 12 sons. Okay, plus he adopted 2 of his sons of one of his son, and his son is Joseph. Okay, so he adopted Ephraim and Manasseh. So technically, Ephraim and Manasseh are not his sons. They are not sons of Jacob. They are his grandsons. Okay, but altogether you have not 12, but how many tribes? 13 tribes, okay? Because 12, and instead of 1, you replace 1 with 2, you happen to have 13. What happened is, why do we always talk about 12 tribes of Israel? Because Levites ended up having separate status. So you have Levites as like really priestly guys, priestly clan, and then 12, I don't want to say normal people, but kind of like a regular tribes, Yeah, one of them would be kingly tribe, Judah, but so that's a different story.
Landed tribe and not landed tribe. Wow.
Yeah, so the main difference, thank you. The main real difference actually that's important, between Levites and everybody else is Levites have no land. Just no whatsoever. I mean, they can have property. I mean, personally, they can have property, but there is no land designated to them as that's your tribal place. Okay? That's it. They had to be scattered. They would be settled. Some of them would be in, cities of refuge, or they should be scattered all over the country, in the towns, and teach the book of the law. Basically, they were first pastors. When you hear an idea that the synagogal structure developed only after Babylonian captivity, no. Because in Deuteronomy, you have a commandment for Levites to have a place that would be dedicated for worship and studying scriptures. What is that if not a synagogue? I mean, you can call it however you want it. It's just a synagogue. I mean, if it walks like a dog, if it talks like a dog, it is what? It is a dog, okay? So that's the thing. So what we have here in these two verses, now let us go to our wonderful map. Map of Israel. Okay. We have 2 on the top, 2 on the north, Naphtali and Dan. So basically we have tribes that kind of like a designate the map out the land. Okay? Naphtali and Dan are on the top. Manasseh and Ephraim are kind of like center and west, close to the sea, and that's, there is even specific phrase here as far as Western Sea. So Western Sea is what we call Mediterranean Sea, okay? So that's our Mediterranean or Western Sea for the Bible. And then you have Judah on the south, and you have east point that they need to first go through is Jericho. Okay, that's right here. So Moses is able to see all of this land from the plain, from the mountain Nebo. What I've read in some different commentaries or atlases and stuff like that, there is no geographical point where you can really see that stuff. Because from here, like to here, is about 200 kilometers. So which is, 120 miles? Even though we have a phrase here that he was 120 years old, but his eyes were not dimmed and stuff like that. I think it relates to something else. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Even with whatever beautiful eyesight you have, to see over, even from the mountaintop, to see over about 120 miles, would be really suspicious. Though, I do believe the Bible. So somehow, I don't know how. And in some sense, I don't really care how, Lord was able to do that. So he showed him the land. Okay? That's it. How? That's not my problem. He promised, he did it. It's his problem to fulfill it. For me, that's what very important, I think, lesson that we can learn is when we see these kind of things in the Bible, it's like, oh, he couldn't see it. So we think what our abilities are, he just couldn't see it, therefore the Bible is wrong. I don't think so. I think I just cannot comprehend it. I don't know how it happened. It just happened. Okay? So he sees the whole land from north, west, south, and east. Okay? So he knows how it looks like. But Lord doesn't give him chance to be there. Okay? So when you see a thing, you see it kind of from afar. What's the, in a sense, close relationship? Is when you can like touch it, okay? Or if you have a close relationship with a person, you can hug the person. Or if you have really close relationship, you can kiss the person, and whatever happens with after, we're gonna leave it, we'll skip that part. But seriously, so he kind of, even though Paul says that seeing is not believing, in this particular case, it's kind of like, you see, I fulfill, because we will come. Right after that, God said, I swore, I fulfilled. Okay? So you can see that I fulfilled it, but you will not have it. You will not be part of that. And that's an important concept. We'll come to that in a second. Okay? But there is a theological joke with that. With Moses not being able to be in the land. So, theoretically, most of the commentators agree that the mountain where Jesus had transfiguration experience was either here, like here, closer to where present Haifa is, or maybe a little bit closer to Nazareth, where he was born. Okay, so somewhere here. The thing is, both of these places are in the land. So when gospel writers say that they talked with Jesus, Moses and Elijah talked with Jesus, Moses said, oh, that's how it is to be in the land. So that was kind of like a Mosaic phrase, written into mouths of Moses, with some kind of good sense of humor teachers. But if we'll go further, verse 4 says very important thing. And the Lord said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. Few things about that. First of all, this is a great example in the Bible where God's promises are fulfilled, regardless of time. And one of the idea was when we talked with Pastor to start these Bible studies is to give you a sense of time when you read the Bible, where things happen, in the time sense. So if we can have our timeline, and my kids, please do remind me to take our markers next time. Okay, so this is roughly, let's say, 30 AD. That's where, when Calvary happened. Okay? Let me try to switch to red. This is about 1800 BC. That's the time of Abraham, roughly. Okay? 1400 BC, that's about time of Moses. Okay? So, about 400 some years later, before Moses, God promised to Abraham, and then he repeated to Isaac, and then he repeated to Jacob, that this land will belong to your offspring. And we'll talk a little bit more on the term offspring. 400 plus years later, God fulfilled it. Okay? We have some promises in the Bible that their fulfillment is kind of like really stretched. And you do not see it in the first generation, second generation. It's like, it doesn't work. And some people stop to believe, but some people do believe. And then you have in the Bible, and as the prophet such and such said it, and you go back in time, it's like 400 years pass by. Okay? So that's the things. To give you another sense of time, another time marker, roughly 1000 BC, we have a temple. Solomon's temple. Okay? More exact date is 586 BC. What happened? The temple was destroyed. Exactly. Okay? So that's how we progress in time. So if we are in the books of Moses, that's about here. The period of time, here. If we are about David's Psalms, or Proverbs by Solomon, we are about here. If we are into Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, roughly, somewhere over here. Okay? And then we have New Testament books. The books are written here mostly about this time. Okay? Yeah, but that was a great remark in the sermon that the letter to Hebrews was written before the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Because if the temple is destroyed, that just doesn't make any sense. Because everything is gone. Because what he goes is like Moses, and we'll come to this thing. It's really cool, And all those rituals, they are great. They're awesome. This is our great heritage. But Jesus is greater. But if we don't have him, if the temple is destroyed, it's like what you compare with. There's nothing there. Okay? So this is important. But let's read carefully. In our Deuteronomy, what God claims. He says that this is the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. Okay? In Hebrew, it's actually to your seed. Okay? Their seed. Okay? The fact that Moses doesn't have a chance to get into the land makes him not the seed. Even though, yes, he is part of the tribe of Levi, he is part of those who were born by Jacob and so on and so forth, but he is not the seed that should inherit the land. However great he is, at the very end of the chapter, we have it. After Moses was none like him, nobody did those signs and wonders, nobody had this strength, nobody this, nobody that. In a sense, this is such a gospel story because it forces us to expect somebody else. If Moses was so great and he does not inherit the land, that means he is not the seed, there should be someone else. There has to be somebody else. Okay? So it's when we read those stories, it's like, interesting. What were they thinking when they would read it? They should have expected somebody else. So no wonder, that Jesus' days, some of people accepted him as Messiah, some people expected other people as Messiahs. There was so much messianic movement, in a sense. There was this guy called himself Messiah, this guy called himself Messiah, this guy called himself Messiah. Yeah, why? Because people expected somebody else. Okay? So, verses 5 through 7. Okay? So Moses, servant of the Lord, and we talked during the sermon, pastor said some words about the servant of the Lord, died here in the land of Moab according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite of Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Okay? Few things about that. First of all, God fulfills his promises. Some of his promises are blessings, like I will give the land, and he gives the land. Some of his promises are not really pleasant, and he told Moses he is gonna die. Few like months or years before that happened, he is not gonna enter the land. And Moses pleaded with the Lord a few times, and we have another pleader with the Lord. You know, in New Testament, you remember the Paul, he said, I plead with the Lord to remove that thing, whatever he means. Some kind of thing that was sting in his flesh, whatever that was. You know, and theologians are doubting and saying, maybe it was his problem with his eyesight. Okay. Maybe it was his problems sometimes with faith and his abilities to see that the word, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Whatever that was, it wasn't really released, but God gave power to overcome it. Okay, so here, Moses is not entering the land, and that's God's promise. So promises should be fulfilled. But there is a reason why Moses is not going into the land. There are a few reasons. Apart from, remember that story when he had stroked the rock? Okay, yeah. He kind of screwed up. So therefore there is a disciplinary act. But there is a serious, at least two that I can find, more serious theological reasons why he couldn't get into the land. First of all, is to go into the land, as I said, it starts a really new phase in the life of Israel. They needed new leader. They needed Joshua. There should be someone else who would lead them over, and everything would be set anew. It's a new creation story. Okay? There is another reason. Think, wise Moses would not only lead them out of Egypt, but bring them into the land. And then he would die, and they would bury him. And what would happen? Oh, yes. Oh, they would worship his grave. You doubt me? No, don't doubt me. I have a biblical proof. We can go to 2 Kings chapter 18. 2 Kings chapter 18. In chapter 18, and we talked about this guy when we started Bible study. That's the guy that kind of like in time corresponds with Isaiah. Okay, so it's about 700 BC. So if we are on our time chart, we are roughly here. That's our 2 Kings chapter 18. King Hezekiah. What happens with King Hezekiah? Good guy, faithful to the Lord. Everything that he was trying to do right. Pay attention to verse 4. He removed the high places. Good guy. Broke the pillars and the cut down of Asherahs. Okay, so it's kind of Middle East cult. We are not going to go into that. Just bad guy. Bad cult. And he broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses has made. For until those days, this people of Israel had made offerings to it. It was called Nehushtan. Think about that. It's just a bronze serpent that Moses made back in the wilderness. Back there, we have not even one mention of that. not in the book of Joshua, not in the book of Judges, nothing about glorious time of David, nothing about Solomon. We have a temple standing in Jerusalem, and somewhere in the land we have that thing. And people, apart from temple, they still would go and worship this bronze snake. Okay? Think what they would, knowing that, think what they would do with the grave of Moses. The people would probably come for healings, I have a paralyzed hand, touch the hand, I have a headache, touch with the head, I have a hemorrhoid, sorry. Whatever, we can joke about that as far as we want, but that's what would happen. Seriously. Verse 7. Let us go back to chapter 34 of Deuteronomy. See, me and my wife, not our kids, when Soviet Union started to fall apart, just to give you a couple, seconds of going back to Deuteronomy 34, so you can flip the pages. But when Soviet Union started to fall apart and communist ideology was falling apart, and everybody realized this is not really a real thing, so many good things happened. Churches started to do evangelism, but so many weird things happened. We had TV magicians, he would wave his hands, in front of the camera, and everybody would put their jars with water and charge the water. And it will heal all your problems, and hemorrhoid included. Or some people would touch the screens with their problematic parts of the body, when this guy would, preach, quote unquote, this kind of stuff. So it was a weird time. We've seen some weird thing in our lives. So, verse 7. We are back in Deuteronomy 34. Moses was 100 years old when he died. His eyes were not undimmed, and his vigor unabated, and so on and so forth. And then we'll go to the weeping part. But, okay, it is another chronology, very important, where we can do it. Let's have it here. So Moses' life, is equally spread into 120 years. Okay? And the wilderness took how many years? 40 years. We know it. Okay? So he was 80 years old. We know it right from Deuteronomy. Okay? Remember 1:1, right there, basically in the very beginning of Deuteronomy. And we also know that he left Egypt first time when he was how many years? How old he was? He was 40 years old. If by any chance you have Jewish neighborhoods or you have Jewish neighbors, they will question this date. Why? Because this date is not in 5 books of Moses. In 5 books of Moses, we have not even single place where it's mentioned how old he was when he tried to save the Israelites with his own power, basically. How do we know about this phrase? If we go to Book of Acts, in chapter 7, we have Stephen's sermon. And in his sermon, good guy Stephen actually gives us few hints on chronology of Israel. One of them is when he was 40 years old. So, it's interesting to know that we know more than even some Jewish guys about their Moses. It's actually our Moses, but okay. He's equally ours as theirs, but So that's very interesting. That's why we need to read it from the very beginning, from Genesis to Revelation. Because if we read from Genesis to Revelation, we have a full story. and one part adds to another part, and that's, okay, now it makes sense. Okay? Now verse 4. 30 days they had mourning. Okay? They mourn for the death of the great man Moses. And if we would have a little bit more time, I will just simplify it. We have 3 leaders in the period of Exodus. It is Moses, his brother Aaron, okay, who was in charge of the cult, basically, and we have a prophetess Miriam. All 3 of them die outside of the land. First, Miriam dies, and it's very interesting to see. When Miriam dies, we find new sources of water.
We find what?
Water, agua, drinking stuff. Somehow, I don't know why, but in the Bible, women are very closely connected with water. I don't know why. Where did servant find a wife for Isaac, servant of Abraham? At the well. Where did Jacob find his wife? At the well. Where did Moses find his wife? At the well. Where did Jesus find a Samaritan woman? The well. Okay? Well done, yeah. Yep. So, and it's interesting. I mean, just skip to that story. John 4, Gospel of John chapter 4. He is a 7th man in her life. Because she had 5 husbands and the guy right now, and then comes Jesus. By no means I want to implore anything, sexual or erotic, but he's like a proper, total, proper would be a better word, proper Adam for her. He covers her needs. I mean, he fulfills her needs, main needs. The most important need that she had is she was not accepted by her society. But because nobody in the right mind will go to the well at noon. Why would you want to go to the well at noon? Only if you want to avoid meeting with other people. But after meeting with Jesus, she goes to society and she brings them such a news that they don't care about her status. So that's kind of like an interesting saving point. So Miriam dies, they have water. When Aaron dies, they win the war or the battle. And when Moses dies, they go into the land. So it's like 3 main gifts. So in a sense, they had to die. That's important. And then they have new leader, verse 9. And bear with me, we will be done soon. Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, and Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him, and as the Lord has commanded Moses. Isn't this funny phrase? Let's go to Joshua, just turn a couple pages further. Chapter 1. Joshua chapter 1, verses 16 to 18. So, first, Lord calls Joshua, then Joshua tells the people, and they, so Israelites, verse 16, and they answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord, your God, be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your words, whatever you command, he shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. Okay? We will obey you as we obeyed Moses. Isn't this ironic? So when we read it in Deuteronomy, it's kind of like that, this is just one more time remind us. Yeah. Yes. It's kind of, it has a parallels in our life. We were at one of the weddings, my wife's relatives, and the preacher said, husband, wife, free evangelical church, not Lutheran, and it's good that they have such a high esteem of idea of the church, and I do too, but I also do know that church consists of people, and church would be perfect if not the people. But, so the preacher said, blah, 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 something to husband, like Ephesians 5, famous passage, you have to love her regardless of anything, and you have to be faithful to your husband and obey your husband as church obeys Christ. And then my wife turns to me, do you want us to just obey as you are. Don't do as the church does. Because knowing the history of the church, it's kind of tricky. It's almost the same phrase, we will obey to you as we obeyed Moses. Sure. Go ahead, Joshua. Go to first closest pharmacy and get some pills, because your heart attack is coming soon. Now, verses 10 to 12, the very end of the chapter. That's important, one more time. And there has not risen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, none like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and all his land, and for all the mighty power and the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. Okay? Three main things. So, there was no like Moses in three things. Because Lord knew him, face to face. Second thing is signs and wonders. And then great powers. I will summarize it, but something like that. Okay? So when they were expecting somebody to come, that's at least these three things they would look for. No wonder why, not surprising why gospel writers pay so much attention that Jesus says, this is my Father. Not because this is not our Father, not your Father, but we have such a close relationship with Father, me and my Father, because we know each other face to face. He goes aside to kind of like almost hiding places from the crowd to have relationship with the Father, because he knows him face to face. In Gospel of John, it is like it's such a theme. This is the first sign. This is another sign. This is another sign. And he goes through those signs and wonders that Jesus performs on a regular basis. So, slowly but surely, and great powers. The walking on water is one, just for starters, or the same kind of place, but different story, not crossing this way, but this way, they crossed the Galilean Sea, and he was sleeping, and the guys were like, we are, drowning, and the great waves and winds, blah, blah, blah. It's like, teacher, wake up. He was like, if he's sleeping, why you get nervous? And he wakes up, calms down, and they're like, oh, yeah, why? Because he is like Moses. So they make, the gospel writers slowly but surely build up the story that he is like Moses. He is who knows God face to face. He has signs and wonders. He does them on a regular basis. He has great powers. But the thing is, he is even bigger than Moses. And that's what the theology of letter to Hebrews is built on. Whoever the writer, I think it was Paul. Because if Paul, even though I cannot prove it, but it's in my humble opinion, if Paul is Paul, he had IQ like 200. He was so smart that he had no problem to write regular letters in one style and then come up with some theological thingy, kind of an appendix to his PhD thesis previously published, And what he goes through is, see, we have all of this. In our Jewish background theology, we have angels, great. Helpers of the Lord, but Jesus is greater than even angels. We have this great character, Moses. He's really cool. At 120, eyesight is not deemed, being really courageous, and his vigor didn't stop. Nothing happened with him except Lord said, so, stop. Here's your clock time, done. Okay? So, I want to have an eyesight. I'm already have a problem. And I just passed 40. So we have this great Moses. But the son, he's even bigger. So if we'll go for a second to Hebrews one more time of today's reading. And I will add a couple more verses. So we had a reading, and so verse 5 and 6. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later, but Christ is faithful over God's house as a son, and we are his house. If indeed we hold fast our confidence in our boasting in our hope. And then let's go to the very end of the chapter, verses 16 to the end. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt, led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked by 40 years? We will obey you as we obeyed Moses. Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of their unbelief. We see those things, and they did not. We see what has given in Christ, in Messiah, because he is like Moses, but even bigger. Comments, questions?